Please turn with me, if you would, to the 3rd chapter of the book of Lamentations. Lamentations chapter 3. This morning I'd like to take just a few minutes, since it is the last day of the year, and spend some time with some reflections upon 2023. So please pray for me and for Brother Mark, who is preparing his mind to come and follow. I'd like to begin at verse 19. This is Lamentations chapter 3, beginning at verse 19. It says, "Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall, my soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord." Now, those of you who are familiar with the prophet Jeremiah, you know that he was given a very difficult task during the decades that he was a prophet to the land of Judah and to the city of Jerusalem. He had the unhappy situation where he had to basically preside over the destruction of Jerusalem. During the course of his years of serving the Lord and serving God's people, bringing them the word of the Lord, he prophesied during the reign of 5 different kings. One of them was pretty good, the others not so much. And these words are written at the end of a very difficult period of time in his life. I believe that when we look at the book of Lamentations, it's as it were, the prophet is looking around at the rubble of Jerusalem. In around 586 or so, the year 586 BC, after a lengthy siege, the Babylonians have come in now and have destroyed the city. They've burned the temple, they've torn it down, they've carried away all the remaining implements that were inside of it. Many people lost their lives. Utter, total destruction. Okay. And I think that it's important for us to look at these verses, because whatever kind of year you had, it wasn't as bad as Jeremiah's was. Jeremiah, over these past 12 months and more, he was shut up in the city, knowing the word of the Lord that God said, "I have sworn by my name, I'm not going to repent. This city is going to be destroyed because of its unfaithfulness to me, because of its continued rebellion against me. The city is loath." But nevertheless, notice what the prophet says. He says, "I have been through great sorrow. I've gone through great pain. It's like wormwood. It's bitterness to me." But he says, "Nevertheless, I still have hope. I still have hope, because I know who it is that is in control of my life. It's of the Lord's mercies that we're not consumed, because his compassions fail not." You know, you could say that Jeremiah was a glass half full kind of guy. He said, well, at least we're not all destroyed. At least we're still here. And I think that that's a scriptural way to look at our life, and especially at a time such as this, when we come to the close of another year. You know that in the world, there are many people who are going to be out celebrating tonight, and God bless them if they do it moderately. There's much to celebrate and rejoice in the coming year, and we'll talk about that. But I find it amusing and rather ironic that these same people who are probably saying to themselves, many of them, are saying, "Oh boy, I'm glad that 2023 is done. Bring on 2024. It's going to be a wonderful year." They're excited. They're ready to be done with the last year, and they're ready to start celebrating the coming year. I wonder what they'll be doing 12 months from now. I wonder if at the end of 2024, assuming we're still here, if they'll be doing the same thing. I think it's appropriate to look forward to the coming blessings of God. I don't have any problem celebrating in moderation, in an appropriate way, to celebrate the coming year. That's fine. But we also ought to look back with remembrance and with gratitude and with reflection on the year that we have had. Think about what the prophet here is saying. He's saying, this has been a tough year. This has been a tough time. He's uttering his complaint before God, but he's also praising God. Because he says, your compassions never fail. They're new every morning. We know where our hope is, and that is in the Lord. So let's talk just for a few minutes. This is kind of an opportunity for me as the pastor to kind of step up and say, let's look back over the year 2023 and just talk about some of the highlights and the lowlights that we had, if lowlights is a word. We started the year with another Christmas flood. Do you all remember that? This was, of course, before the beginning of 2023, but we had yet another flood. And we just thought, here we go again. We had a cold snap and some of our pipes froze and they burst. And as you know, as you can see around here, we had to replace the carpet and we had to rearrange the benches. But don't you see that was kind of a joyful time as well? We all came together and worked together, and Lord provided us the funds and the things that we needed to be able to put down new carpet and to kind of clean up the place a little bit. But that's how the year started. That was just a year ago. During the past year, I can think of at least 4 memorial services that we had. Of course, these are not in any kind of order of importance, but of course we lost Brother Dale. Brother Dale West was taken home to be with the Lord, and we miss him greatly. He was a very beloved brother and friend and deacon of this church, and I know we miss him greatly. But we had to deal with that. Brother Dale was taken home. Early in the year, one of the reasons we scrambled around to get the carpet in place was so we could have the memorial service for my cousin, Sister Karen Chamberlain, right? Chamberlain. Sister Chamberlain. Of course, Sister Karen lived up in Colorado, so we had her family's here, but we had a very sweet and comforting service for her. That was kind of sad, though. Karen's gone. But she's home. She's home. We also lost Sister Ruth Lambert. Y'all know Sister Ruth, of course. After a long illness, we had to see her go and go. And I know that we miss seeing her smiling face and her love and her patience. But I want you to remember that was kind of the sorrow of this year as well. And though we didn't know him perhaps as well as others that I've mentioned, we also lost Brother Dan White. Brother Dan, they moved here, Dan and Sister June, they moved here from Florida, and they were struck with illness and not able to come, and Sister June still is not able to come very often. But these are beloved brothers and sisters of ours. They joined our church and they transferred their membership, and they've been a part of us, and we had to say goodbye to Brother Dan. I was looking forward to years with him because he was such an interesting, wonderful brother. But we only got to know him for a short time, and the Lord took him home. And so those are some of the bitterness, some of the sadness that we had to face. And of course, we had a lot of illnesses. I jokingly say that Sister Martha Lambert probably had 25 surgeries. I don't think it was quite that many. Sure, it probably felt like that for her, but many of you all had surgeries, and there were illnesses. There were great sicknesses. Some of the people in this congregation we thought we might have lost, and by the grace of God, we would have. But God restored us. And I want you to think about that too, because even though there were economic difficulties and there were troubling problems in the culture, my goodness, think about how much the culture has changed, how far south it has gone. And think of the wars that are taking place. And we could think about all of the things that were sorrowful during the year, but we can also think about the joys. Think about the joys too. Because we baptized some people. And we had some others join. We got another deacon out of the year, didn't we? We got some other brethren. We've had other people that have been coming and attending. We've had some wonderful meetings. What do you think of the last 2 communions that we had? The one in May and the one in November. Could you feel the presence of the Lord with us? Think about our meeting back when we had Brother Elmo and Brother Vernon with us back in July. The Spirit moved mightily with us. I'm just thinking about the time that we've had. It's been difficult. There have been troubling problems and we've had losses. But in a whole balance of scheme of things, I think we're far better off than we were a year ago. I know I am. I know that I have drawn closer through the troubles and the problems I've experienced. My prayer life is so much more rewarding and solid and serious. My love for the Scriptures and my love for you is so much greater because of the things that we've had to suffer, because of the difficulties that we've gone through. And that's part of the thing we need to remember and we need to reflect upon. I have talked to a lot of people. I think I've talked with most of you, and I can't say that this is 100% sure, but I don't know many people who look back at 2023 and say, wow, that was a really great year for me. Made a lot of money, got a new job, everything was bright and glorious. I just don't get the sense that 2023 was like that for many of you. If it was, great. I mean, we're thankful to have the Hassenmyers with us. My goodness, what a wonderful blessing it is. I hope that this has been a joy to have you all come join us. But for most people that I've spoken with, both in the church and just my friends out, most people have said that this has been a difficult year. Would you agree with me that there's something about this year in particular that it just seemed different than maybe years in the past? Would you all agree with that? Okay. But you know what I think it's been? I think it's been a purifying year. I think it's been a year of purification. I think it's been a time when we, God's people, have been especially blessed of God to understand what's important and what's not. And to get rid of some of the things in our lives that maybe we were paying too much attention to. Maybe there were some things in our life that we've had to let go of and maybe not be quite so enamored with the things of this world and to have our hearts lifted up and drawn together. Because I can tell you there's no place on the earth. Now I got to be careful because I do have my friends from Kansas. I include them as well. But really, there's no place on earth rather than at home. Of course, home's a wonderful place to be. But there's really no place I'd rather be than with you all. To be in the service of our Lord. To be gathered together when we are just simply coming together to hear the gospel preached to us and to sing the songs of Zion and to lift up our hearts in prayer and to spend time one with another. This is what God has given us. It's a place of refuge. It's a place of peace. Now, 2024 is going to be worse than 2023. I'm just going to make that prediction right now. I hope I'm wrong. But in some ways, I think that God prepared us for what's to come. I think every one of us, knowing what I know about each of you, I think that your faith is deeper and it burns brighter and your contentment is deeper and your patience is greater. I think we've all learned lessons during this year. Would you all agree with me on that? I really do. I perceive that. And that's why I wanted to take some time to share it with you. There's a couple of places that I want to go and read to you because I think this is the Lord's people's experience throughout the Bible, that there are just simply times that are challenging. There's times that are difficult, but there's also times of great joy in the midst of that. In Psalm 34, David writes these words. He says, "The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open unto their cry. The face of the Lord is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord heareth, and delivereth them out of all their troubles. Have you found that to be true? Have you found that to be true? The Lord hears you. I wish I could say, I wish I could say, you're not going to have any troubles during 2024. I really wish I could say that, but I can't. But what I can say is that the Lord is going to deliver you out of every single one of them in His way, in His time. One of the things I've learned to pray, and this is a very strange prayer for me to pray, but I have been praying, God, the Lord, if I ask for something that is contrary to your will, do not grant it. Let your will be done. That's one of the lessons I've learned during this year. We all say that. We all know the Bible says, let your will be done, but not mine. But I'm beginning to appreciate how effectively and how wondrously God moves through our lives and that He provides for us. He delivers us out of all of our troubles. Did anybody have any troubles this year? I did. You know what? The Lord delivered me from them. And I'm so full of gratitude for this year. I'm ready to celebrate 2024. But before we do that, let's express some gratitude to God for all of His blessings during 2023. The righteous cry, and the Lord heareth and delivereth them out of all their troubles. The Lord is nigh, which means near. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all. We can read that and we can believe it, but it's something else if we experience it. And I trust that if the present trends of the world continue the way that they're going, we're all going to be experiencing that even more. But I want your hope and your trust to be in the Lord, okay? Because He will deliver, just as He delivered Jeremiah. I mean, I don't envy him in having to stand there and all of that, destruction around him. And there may be destruction that we see in our life in the coming year. But if we do, I assure you the Lord's going to be with us. And I can't wait to see what He unfolds. Let me read a few more verses out of 1 John chapter 3, and with this I'll step aside and ask Brother Mark to come. But think about this. This is what John the Apostle had to say. The one who wrote the book of Revelation. Of course, he recorded what was shown him. But this is a letter that says this: Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew Him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when He shall appear, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And every man that hath this hope in Him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. God purifies us through the troubles and the problems and the difficulties and the issues that we face. And He does this to draw us closer to Him. He's made you pure. And yet we are purified by the experiences that we have, and we're drawn closer to Him. My prayer for you is that you have a wonderful 2024, that God blesses you, that you look forward with hope and with joy, and that you look back with gratitude and thanksgiving for all the blessings that He has given us. Thank you very much. May God bless you. Come ahead, dear Brother Mark.
Yeah, so what Brother Randy said is important. It's scriptural. If you recall, on a number of occasions, the Lord told Israel to commemorate certain things that happened, and they would, on occasion, build a structure, a pile of stones, when they crossed over into the Promised Land. various occasions, they would build a monument to remember a certain event. And then, of course, the Lord told them to tell their children day in, day out about the things that God had done for them. And so that's scriptural, and it is important to take time. The last day of the year is as good a time as any to remember what the Lord has done for you in the past year. If you don't do that, you lose a lot of perspective. Think that you're in a constant state of need and unsure about God's provision for that need. You can feel that way. But if you take time on a regular basis to think back, oh yeah, the Lord, He carried me through that thing. That's the purpose of that, is to remember God's providence. So that's important that you, as a church, do that, and as individuals do that, as families do that. So whatever I say, I don't want you to forget or take away from what Brother Randy said. That's very, very important. I will take just a verse from the book of Lamentations to try to set up what's on my mind this morning. And I'll admit to you, I don't see a seamless connection here, and I'm concerned that what I have on my mind is just not the right thing to talk about at all on the last day of the year. But here we are. We'll trust God with that. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 27. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. It's good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. We'll take that as sort of a jumping off point to try to talk about what is on my mind. If you were here last Sunday, you will recall that I spoke a little bit about the experience of Joseph, the legal father of Jesus Christ, and what his experience might have been like as he tried to navigate all of the unforeseen to him circumstances that he was confronted with as a father and a husband. And during that message, I alluded to what I called the burden, and that's a Bible word. We're probably more familiar with the word responsibility, but either way, how a man feels when he gets married. And that feeling of having responsibility for his wife and the family. I also said, and want to point out again, it doesn't matter how new age our society gets to try to say that burden that a man feels for his wife and family. It doesn't matter how new age society gets to try to say that's culturally appropriated, that a man feels that way because of the culture in which he's raised. False. Doesn't matter how new age society gets. A man is going to feel that way all the time, no matter where he grows up, because that is God's imprint on a man. He feels that way. He has that burden to bear. And I'll say one more time, just for clarity's sake. When I say burden, I don't mean to say it is somehow an impediment or a drag on a man. I'm just saying it's a responsibility that a man feels, no matter what culture he's raised in, if his mind and heart are correct. I'll also say that responsibility, that the feeling of that burden being placed on a man for his wife and family, it's not peculiar to that circumstance. I have felt that exact same feeling when called to pastor a church. Brother Randy, I'm certain, feels it for you. In fact, he's just confessed that he does. That feeling, I'll just share that my experience with you, was a surprise to me. I did not know that was going to happen. Now I do know when that happens. But it was a surprise, and it was very definite. It was very perceivable to me, something I felt immediately and knew what God's will for me was in that circumstance. That was a surprise, but there it was. I recognized it for what it was because I had felt it when I got married, and I also felt it, just one more thing, one more time. When my first child was born, my third child was here. This is nothing to detract from her, very lovely young lady, but when you have your first child, you go through sort of some emotions that you have to grapple with. And I remember that same kind of feeling when we were leaving the hospital after Evans was born. I felt that same thing come upon me. I felt like they're letting me leave with this child. Shouldn't someone go with us? That's how I felt. And I realize now what that was. That is God's providence for a man to bear the responsibility for his wife and family, and in one other case, the church, when he's called a pastor at church. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. A man is called to do certain things, and so is a woman. Don't get me wrong. I covered that last Sunday. But my subject this morning is motherhood. It has its own responsibilities and feelings, things that are peculiar to them. It is good for man to bear the yoke in his youth. This verse speaks about a man laboring. If you read on down the rest of this passage, which I'm not going to, but if you did, you would read about this man having his mouth in the dust when he is bearing the yoke in his youth. He's working hard. His head is down. He is in the dust. He's working hard to do what he's called to do. And that's really my subject this morning, but Lord willing, it's just going to go in a way that may seem odd. I don't know. But I guess how I feel today is the way I feel a lot about young men growing up in this society is that sometimes this society will tell a young man that the way that he feels is unnatural and wrong. That what I just expressed to you is something that is sometimes put upon a young man to feel guilty for feeling that way. You ought not to feel that way because there's no difference in the genders, for instance, and which is untrue. That God calls men and women to do very different things. He's made them in different ways. They are different.
That's right.
Not one superior to the other. There is, of course, order in the family, but none is superior to the other. They are one flesh, and they are different. And what God has made different, let not man make the same.
Right.
It's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. It's good. We find that often young men today are not instructed in that. They are not told that you have a responsibility. And you find also, it seems to me, this is my perception, that a lot of times a young man can be afraid of that responsibility when he feels it and will shirk it. And that's wrong. That's not good. That's not good for society. It's not good for him. That a man ought to understand that it's good for him to bear the yoke in his youth, and God has called him to do certain things and to encourage and help them to do that. Again, not taking away from the responsibility of a young woman. Of course, we could talk a lot about that, but this morning that's just not my subject. And as I was thinking about all of these things, as I do often, because I have a son and I see other people's sons and have coached baseball teams and have been around young men a number of times and tried to encourage them in what I think the Lord would have them to do, not what I would have them to do. I'm nobody's example. I'm a very cowardly person, quite frankly. But by God's grace, I feel like He's helped me try to understand and realize I lean on Him and I need Him to help me do what I believe He's called me to do as a father and a husband. I'm thinking about all this, and I recognize that there's a lot of teaching that goes on specifically about Jesus Christ to try to say that a young man should be quite frankly cowardly and wimpy. That's just my word, but wimpy, it's a good enough word. because that's what Jesus Christ was. And I'll say to you that that is not at all what he was. He was certainly a meek person, but that does not mean he's wimpy. He fulfilled his responsibility more perfectly than anyone ever has, to the point of dying upon a cross when he could have, in an instant, ended it, you see. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. If anybody ever bore the yoke in his youth, it was Jesus Christ. And he is the example of what every young man should be called to be. So we find that sometimes it is erroneously portrayed that Jesus Christ was a person who was, like I've tried to describe, would not fulfill his godly responsibilities, and I hope that I declared clearly that that was not the case at all. And I thought about really the death of Stephen, because sometimes you hear this event portrayed as we as men should succumb, should allow ourselves to succumb to wicked doers. We should give ourselves over to people who would try to harm us or our family. That here we see Stephen, when he dies, he prays a very gracious prayer. If you remember in the book of Acts chapter 7, where Stephen was stoned. But let's not forget, Stephen did not have a choice in the matter. He was cast out of the city. He said some things, and I won't go into this, you can read this, Acts chapter 7, that made his hearers very angry. They gnashed on him with their teeth, which means they were cussing and cursing him. They were exceedingly angry. And they grabbed him, and they cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. And as they did so, he prayed that the Lord would not lay this sin to their charge. Very gracious prayer. But I promise you, I suspect that if you could ask Stephen, would you prefer not to die on this day? He would have said, yeah, I prefer not to die on this day. It was not his purpose to be murdered, and he did not allow himself to be murdered. It's good for a young man to bear the yoke in his youth. He bore a yoke that day. He prayed a very gracious prayer. But that is not scriptural evidence that a person could not defend themselves from evildoers. Person could not stand up for that which is right. And I feel like that, myself included, to my shame, that a lot of what's gone on and where we are now in society is because I've not stood up for that which is right. I've not been maybe loud enough. I've not been vocal enough. I've not done all that I could to stand against the evils that have come upon us in our day. Now, I don't take responsibility for all of it. Sometimes when I get frustrated, I have to look around and I have to say, I didn't cause this. I'm not the one. This happened 30 years before I was born. The seeds of where we are now was started long before that, so I can't control that. But what I can do is I can stand up for righteousness now. That's exactly what Stephen did. He stood up for righteousness. He preached the truth, and it cost him his life, but he preached the truth. A braver thing I can't think of than to do exactly what he did. But when Stephen died in Jerusalem, you might think the way Christians are portrayed from people who don't understand, the way Christians are portrayed and scoffed at, you might think, well, all of the church was happy because now we've got a martyr. Look how glorious it was that one of our members was murdered. No, that's not what happened at all. In fact, they left. Many of the people of the church left. You see, they didn't stay there to be persecuted by evildoers. They left. And that's what the Bible will tell us. Acts chapter 8, verse 1. And Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. They stayed there. But many of the church left. And lo and behold, the gospel was spread more so because of that persecution than had they all stayed there. They all left and went to different towns, moved to different cities. Now, if you think about yourself in that situation as a father or husband, And here we are, we're in a society where Christians are being murdered publicly, which is what happened to Stephen. You're a father and a husband, and you're trying to decide what's the best thing to do for my family. Well, if God calls you to stay, like the apostles, they stayed. If God calls you to stay, you stay. And they stayed, and they were fine. Most of them. Not all of them, but most of them, for a time, they were fine. But if God calls you as a father and a husband, you believe it's the best for your family to leave, then it's your responsibility to get them out of there, you see. That's your job. Get them out of there. And that's what many of them did. They left. It wasn't a joy that one of them was murdered. They left persecution. I saw on Facebook here a few months ago, someone posed the question, if things got worse, became intolerable in your opinion, would you move from the United States of America? And I didn't answer that question on Facebook because I just don't answer a lot of questions on Facebook, but I'll answer it right now in a heartbeat, in an absolute heartbeat. I believe that this country was founded on a structure of people who read the Bible and took that Bible understanding and applied it to a civil government. I believe that with all my heart. I also believe that we have come a very, very long way towards feeding man's depravity, and you can't feed man's depravity and make it go away. If you feed man's depravity, you just make it stronger. And so, we all should recognize that because all the casinos and the medical marijuana places all over. You think all these people who are supporting all these medical marijuana shops are people who really need medical marijuana? If you need painkiller for a disease, I'm fine with that. But I know as well as you do that most of the people walking in there, that has nothing to do with the reason they're walking in there. You can't feed man's depravity and make it go away or appease it. It just makes it stronger, and you'll have to feed it more. And so we find that as we think about society and where we are, I don't believe and I don't feel an affinity towards this country in the sense that I would stay here if God told me to leave and jeopardize my wife and children. I think that would not be bearing the yoke in my youth, even though I'm not as young as I used to be. That we have to do what God calls us to do. And here, these people did that exact thing. They left. But sometimes as an objection, you say, well, what about turning the other cheek? Aren't we supposed to turn the other cheek? And when I hear that, I cringe a little bit because it's almost portrayed as a Christian, you have the responsibility to bear any offense that there is, any harm that there is, and you're supposed to do so not only with a smile on your face. You're not supposed to take that offense. You're not supposed to take that abuse. Not only are you supposed to take someone perpetrating evil on you, you're supposed to let them do more to you than they already did. Now you probably have heard turning the other cheek your whole life, but I probably in your mind you recognize if someone comes up to me on the street and punches me in my face and I go to the ground and they jump on top of me, do you really think the Lord expects you to just hands out let that person pummel you till you're dead? Of course not. Of course not. All of my children carry pepper spray because I gave it to them for a reason. Give that person a face full of pepper spray and run. But aren't you supposed to turn the other cheek? You see, this has been used against disciples of the Lord to try to force them to accept evil for decades. But if you go and you read, and let's do that, Matthew chapter 5. Here's where the Lord says this. He says, ye have heard, this is how he starts, ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. Okay, let's stop right there. First he says, you have heard, it hath been said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. It certainly was said, that was actually written in the law of Moses. That God actually recorded that. An eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Well, let's go look at that. Let's hold our finger right here, Matthew chapter 5, and go look at where this says so. If you just look at your center column, it'll tell you where it is, Exodus chapter 21. And this is a good place to read, actually. If you go to Exodus chapter 21 and verse 24, you'll see the quotation of what the Lord was saying there in Matthew chapter 5. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. But if you look at that verse, it's actually in the middle of a sentence. If you go back up to the beginning of the sentence, this is good to read for all of us, especially in American culture right now. Let's read where this comes from. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow. The circumstance here in the law is, they're describing a legal situation. When two men begin fighting, and when these two men begin fighting, they injure a woman who is pregnant. And what happens is the law here describes what is to follow when they injure this woman who is pregnant, what is supposed to be done in legal society. And by the way, the Lord shows His righteousness in His law. We're not under the law, but He shows His character, His nature in His law. He doesn't give an unrighteous or wicked law. His laws are righteous in as much as they apply to Jewish society back then. Okay. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, and yet no mischief follow, kind of a strange word, that we wouldn't maybe describe it this way, but this word will define itself, and no mischief follow. He, the man who injured the woman who is pregnant, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband, the pregnant woman has a husband, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So this woman's fruit departed from her. Maybe not, again, the way we would describe this situation, but that doesn't mean the way the Bible describes it is wrong. It's just different language. These two men are fighting. They hit the woman who is pregnant. They cause her to go into labor. And the Bible here says if she goes into labor and no mischief follows, meaning the baby is born and is fine, then the husband, even though the baby is fine, the husband still gets to impose a penalty, a fine, on the man who caused this injury to his wife, even though she was fine and the baby was fine. All of this defines itself. He shall pay as the judges determine. And then the verse 23 says, here's the opposite thing that could happen. This woman who is pregnant is injured and mischief follows. Again, for the third time, her having the baby and mischief following may not be the way you would describe this situation, but that doesn't make the Bible wrong. It just means we need to figure out what the Bible is saying. And here in this situation, the woman who was with child, mischief follows. And previously, the mischief not following was the woman, her fruit departing from her, and mischief did not follow. In this situation, the fruit departed from the woman and mischief followed. The baby died. The baby died. Then thou shalt give life for life. The Lord imposes the death penalty on a man who is fighting with another man and injures a pregnant woman, and that baby, she goes into labor because of the injury, and that baby is born and the baby dies. The baby does not survive. That man has to pay with his life. Now, if you think about this just for a few minutes, first you recognize the man's life is required for life. That baby in the womb is a life. Amen. Number one. Number two, it doesn't say what stage of pregnancy the woman has to be. She just has to know she's pregnant, you see. And from what I read, a woman can show pregnancy as little as 12 weeks. So at 12 weeks, she would be obviously pregnant. Some women. She would be pregnant and she would show. At 12 weeks, if two men are fighting and injures the woman, that she goes into labor and delivers a baby at 12 weeks, which would not survive today, much less in this society, from what I know, that this baby at 12 weeks is a life that has now been forfeited, and therefore he must forfeit his life. So that's good to read, just to recognize that, and if you dig further, you will find that the Bible will teach you life begins at conception, and at conception, a life is a life. You don't need 20 weeks, or you don't need 6 months, or you don't need the third trimester. At conception, a life is a life, and if you kill that baby at conception, you've killed a baby. Here we find that the Bible describes all of that situation, but what got us here was the Lord's teaching on an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this is where you read that. And he says, the person who has caused the death of this baby shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If you go back to right here where we are, and you look at the scripture, you see that a legal offense has been committed. This is the imposition of the penalty, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. A legal offense has been committed. Now come back to Matthew 5. And the Lord is going to talk about, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. A Jewish person would recognize that statement applies to someone who has committed a legal offense. They're guilty of something, and they're required to pay equal to the offense that they committed, what they perpetrated. If I killed someone in that way, my life is required. And incidentally, not every death in the Mosaic Law required someone else to be put to death. Not every time. Not every time. In fact, sometimes you will hear someone say, well, to a Christian, doesn't the Bible say, thou shalt not kill? It certainly does say that. That's one of the 10 Commandments. And they would then go on to say, well, therefore, if you believe that, anytime that someone is put to death, that you are committing an offense or a sin before God. Not true. In fact, if you just look at Exodus chapter 20, you'll read there where it says, thou shalt not kill. And then before you get to the end of that chapter, God will prescribe, I don't know, a dozen situations where a person has to be put to death. God is serious about lawfulness. And therefore, that's why the Lord said, when he's referred to the commandment that thou shalt not kill, he explained it clearly to what it means when he says, thou shalt do no murder. You shall not murder. If you murder, your life should be required. Your life should be required if you murder. But what got us there, back to sort of where I was, is when the Lord begins to refer to this passage, he's referring to a situation where a person has committed a legal offense. They've offended in the law, and they are therefore required to pay a penalty. And let's see what he says. But I say unto you, ye resist not evil. And what he's saying is what you pay for your offense, what you are required by law to pay for your offense. You resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. A verse that's taken to try to impose upon Christians how they are to swallow any evil that's perpetrated on them, no matter what it is, no matter how heinous it is. Here is an evil perpetrated on you, disciple of Jesus Christ. Take it, because the Lord said, turn the other cheek. The Lord continues with this. Let's just let him expound on it. Let's let him describe for us what he's talking about. He goes on and he says, if any man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat. You see, what's happened here in this verse is someone sued you and they've won. Why? Because you've committed a legal offense. You've done something wrong. And the law has awarded your coat to the person who sought a legal judgment against you. You have to give them your coat. And what the Lord is saying then is if you've committed a legal offense and you are found guilty of that and you have to give your coat, give your cloak also. Bend over backwards to be a law-abiding citizen, you see. Now, I stand before you as someone who goes over the speed limit, and that's to my shame. And probably we recognize that in the grand scheme of things, that is not something that creates societal disorder. But nonetheless, that's the breaking of the law, and I need to do better with that. Well, what he's talking about here is a disciple of Christ. When you have committed a legal offense and you are awarded a judgment against you, that you fulfill that to your very best ability, and not probably, what we ought to do is really go above and beyond, give that person more, so that I might learn to be a law-abiding citizen. You see, this is the context of what Christ is saying to you. If you have been a legal judgment has been rendered against you, and you have to take a smite on the cheek, you take 2 smites, so that the disciples of the Son of God would be, in every way possible, considered upstanding, law-abiding citizens. He goes on, he doesn't stop there. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile. To be compelled is to be required, you see. The person who is compelled to go a mile in this situation is the same setup, same circumstance as the person who has been sued for their coat. That they are required by law or some authority to go a mile. You can read about this word compel when the Lord Jesus Christ was carrying his cross to Golgotha and was not able, because of the physical abuse that he had endured. The Romans compelled Simon to carry the cross for a time up to Golgotha. Well, I promise you, the Roman soldiers were not pleading and begging with Simon to carry the cross. They told him, you have to do this, and you have to do it now. He was compelled. He was required by law to do that. And so it is, if someone compels you, if you're required by an authority to do this service, go to. Give more than the minimum that is required, which is good advice for a man bearing the yoke in his youth. I try to tell my children all the time, if you work for somebody, you're still in business for yourself. You're still working for yourself. Be the person who's there 15, 30 minutes early. Be the person who gives more than the minimum that is required, because it's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Not only is that good for you, it honors God. Here I am, a disciple of Christ, and I'm going to try to be the best employee that this place knows. Here the Lord tells us, if someone compels you to walk a mile, go 20, go 2. But it's the same setup as in the previous verse of a legal judgment or an authoritative judgment against. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. A fine neighbor, a fine, upstanding citizen. But the Lord does not intend, when he says, if someone smites thee on the cheek, turn the other also, that means that the church should accept and bow down to all the evil that goes on in the world. In fact, I suspect that the Lord would have us, especially young men, and Lord help us, we need young men in society today to stand up and be young men. We need them to take their responsibility, because it is very easy, it is very simple. It is the path of least resistance for a young man to feel that burden and to shirk from it, to feel the responsibility for a wife and a child and his role in the church, to feel all of this. It is very easy for them to feel all of this and feel intimidated or afraid. I certainly did. To feel that way and decide, instead of trying to step up and lean on God and plead with God to help me figure out how to do what you called me to do, it's much easier to go in and play a video game. To spend your evenings and your weekends playing a video game, much easier to do that. Much easier to watch television, which someone in Hollywood, some sick-minded person in Hollywood has written a storyline or entire episodes or many episodes of many shows, if you pay any attention, that portrays young men and husbands as idiots, as people who can't function in society and ought not to be allowed to be, that they should not have any responsibility for the raising of a family and children, because they're Homer Simpson, if you know who that is. And I hope that you don't. May God help us. May God help me to understand that as I have certainly children, and by God's grace, grandchildren, that even as old as I may get, there is still a yoke for a man to carry, not only in his youth. It's different in his youth than it is in old age, but even as an old man, you still have a yoke to carry for your wife, your children, your grandchildren, and the church. Don't let somebody tell you that Jesus Christ would not do the same and use a verse in which is not even intended to try to persuade young people to swallow the evil that the world casts upon them every single day. That verse is something different altogether. Be fine, lawful, upstanding citizens, yes. Be the best employee that your employer has. Be that kind of person. But also may God help us that when it comes time to stand up against unrighteousness and do what we can, do what He has put within our purview to influence, to stand against unrighteousness. May He help us to bear the yoke, not only the young men, not only the old men, but the women and every person in the church. May He help us to bear the yoke, because we're in a time that really needs the children of God to bear the yoke and stand against evil. And it may cost some of us our lives, and some of us may scatter, and so be it. God's will be done. But don't think that He has not called us to stand against it. May God bless you. Come ahead.
God bless you.